Welcome back to the B-Sides of Sports, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 1. Here as the NFL season finally came. First week has already come and gone, as crazy as that is. But with that, we got a very interesting week of football, a kind of lower scoring slate than I think what we've been used to, as well as some very surprising matchups, some very key injuries, and just, a lot of chaos that we have come to know as the NFL. And to open things up, we're going to go with the Sunday night game, the Cowboys and Giants. Obviously, as most of you probably know, the Cowboys blanked the Giants, and on top of that, put up 40 points. Wilson, what were your takeaways looking at this game? Obviously, it's two teams who were playoff caliber last year, seeing such a jarring difference between the two. What were your main takeaways here?
Yep, going into the night, I definitely like the Cowboys more than I like the Giants. That being said, I don't think myself or anyone saw a 40-0 skunk coming our way. If we look at the Giants end of it first, I've never really been a super high Daniel Jones guy. I think he's a fair quarterback, but I do think the offense they ran last year was super suitable to not asking him to have a lot of high-risk throws. I think the addition of Daboll really helped them out last year. And I was expecting a regression year to some extent going into this year. Not necessarily back to the Daniel Jones that we knew of the past, but I definitely didn't expect him to play as a top 10 quarterback. And I think we saw that and worse yesterday. The offense looked staggeringly bad after that first drive. Just mistakes all over the field, drops by receivers. Daniel Jones was fumbling again. Obviously, he threw a couple of picks. So just really not pretty all around for the Giants offense. And then flipping over to the Cowboys side of things, I really like their defense going into the year, and I think they stood strong yesterday. Obviously, Micah Parsons is one of the top contenders for Defensive Player of the Year, and all around that defense just looks really strong. The secondary, I think, held up better than I personally expected going into the year. And then we just know that defensive front, if you double Parsons, then you're leaving, DeMarcus Lawrence open on the outside. If you don't double him, then you're trying to play single coverage with maybe the best rusher in the league right now. So really like the Cowboys defense. We didn't see much out of the offense. I don't think we really needed to. A defensive team score as well as two special team scores. Not really much to see there. 143, pretty pedestrian from Dak. I don't really want to give him a grade on the performance just because, again, I don't really think there was much we could take away when the score is as lopsided as it was, as quickly as it was early on in that game. So I think to recap everything there, the Cowboys look better than I expected and the Giants look worse, but I do think there's a little bit of swing either way there because the matchup didn't look anything at all like as I was expecting to see.
Yeah, I think that was kind of my biggest thing is quite a few of these week one matchups, like the Vikings losing. We aren't even going to talk about that one. But there were or the Bengals getting obliterated as well. I think it's just kind of hard because this week one really is like, I don't know if it's fair to be as hard on these teams, but at the same time, they played like this, right? The Eagles almost being upset by the Patriots. Obviously, there was this game, and like I said, the others as before. So it really just kind of felt like a week out of time almost. So I don't know how much credence I'm going to give to a lot of these week one games because I felt like I don't know what the difference was. Maybe, the 17-game season's still new, so we're getting a lot less preseason football. So I'm thinking maybe that's why we're still seeing some rust week one. But I think that was kind of my biggest takeaway from this game. It wasn't any of the team play in itself, but like you said, the offense was very unimpressive for the Dallas Cowboys. It really was the defense and special teams capitalizing off mistakes. A blocked kick for a touchdown is already a rare occurrence, but it to also happen in a game where your defense overall just gets another score is pretty like one-of-one type games. And I just think, again, when I'm looking at it, I'm not sure how much of this game was the Giants playing bad and the Cowboys playing better as much as the Cowboys being ready for week one while the Giants just did not play like it.
I think you made a lot of really great points there. For fantasy players out there, the Cowboys defense had 40 points yesterday. Again, I think that highlights kind of the discrepancy there. And I think your point about the rust is a lot to be made of the players, the lack of their playing in the preseason nowadays, right? A lot different than it was, a decade ago. I think you're right. This week one games for a lot of players, it's their first real game time situational football. And so I think a lot can be kind of thrown to the wayside as maybe this is just a week one thing, less so a trend. And I think for the Giants, to go back to the Giants, the most concerning thing for me is just looking at the play of Daniel Jones. He really looked kind of shaken out there. And I think you could go back and forth on whether or not that was the O-line and how poorly the O-line played. Maybe it's, is it him being asked to do more on the offensive side of the ball? Obviously, the run game wasn't super strong yesterday. So once they got behind, I don't think it was his night throwing the ball and they really were unable to get back into the game. I think my concern is just when you're paying him that much money, is he going to be able to hold up against the other quarterbacks in the league that are making 40 million plus? And to me, that was a question that I had going into the year. I don't feel great about it after week one, and I don't know if that's just a week one thing for me.
Yeah, see, I disagree with this because Daniel Jones, one of the few things I think that really makes him stand out as a quarterback is his ability to just kind of shake off pressure and not even almost seem like he feels it. You know, that's kind of how he had the moniker of all the turnovers early in his career, was because he's so confident in the pocket to a T, but he just looks so rattled. And I think that could have been being pressured on about 70% of dropbacks last night. I mean, that's an astronomical rate. That's almost like what you see in college ball, you know, like a week one game, right? When Alabama's playing some D2 school that they paid $3 million to play. That's kind of more what this game felt like than a pro football game. And so, like I said, I'm not leaving more of the blame on Daniel Jones as much as the whole Giants team for being unprepared, as well as rain on turf. As we just saw tonight, actually, the artificial turf is just a mess, and it being wet as well, I think might have been a factor for both teams, because Dak even looked unsure of himself. Both of the rushing attacks were pretty mediocre, despite there being so much defensive, stalwart thing. You'd think there would have been some better run games when you usually see that, but there just wasn't. And I think that, to me, when I'm looking at this game, I'm looking at way less the game and more of the conditions of the league, as well as sort of just for, the players as well. Obviously, we heard a lot about the Chiefs-Eagles game, the Super Bowl, a lot of the players slipping. And so the conversation's been on our mind. And I think, to me, this game just kind of reiterated the importance of kind of figuring out what is the stance we're going to have to take on this, as well as I find it interesting when the World Cup comes to America in a few years here, they are going to replace all of the turf with real grass for the World Cup. And I saw some tweets about players being pretty pissed off today and yesterday about some injuries that happened on turf, as there were quite a few because of this. And I just think, to me, this game showed once again why I think the playing field conditions really need to be addressed this offseason.
Fair take. I think with that, we can move on to our second game on the slate today. We're looking at the Dolphins and the Chargers game. A shootout here, 36-34, with the Dolphins coming away and taking that W. Major takeaways for you here, Drake?
I think my biggest takeaway is that I still think Brandon Staley needs to be fired. Just atrocious for Justin Herbert and the offense to hum like they did, almost 100-yard rushers. Justin Herbert had a 100 quarterback rating. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams both looked good. Quentin Johnson wasn't really involved, but the offense was absolutely humming. And then your defense lets up a quarterback who's notoriously been ragged on as being inaccurate and struggling and a bust or overrated, just absolutely lighting up your defense with Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, J.C. Jackson, the highest paid defensive liability out there. This game to me was less of a triumph by the Dolphins, but don't get me wrong, I was very impressed by Tua in this game, but I think I was more unimpressed by Brandon Staley and the Chargers as a whole.
And I think you summarized the Chargers over the last, decade or so very much to a T, where you're right. You listed all the talent on that roster and how well the roster played as a whole, only for them to come away with an L. It's just kind of staggering to see. I was super surprised by the rush game to see Eckler and Kelly both go for nearly, I think Eckler was over 100 yards and Josh Kelly was somewhere around 90 to 100. The rush game was incredible last night. Herbert did hum, the completion percentage was good enough. He was they were executing drives down the field. For them to get beat out in a shutout when they have so much talent on the defensive side of the ball is just something you do not want to see if you're the Chargers. And I do want to give Tua a little bit of credit, but I think the highlight for the Dolphins has got to be Tyreek Hill on that receiving performance. He said it before the season. He wanted to have a 2,000-yard season. Well, he's definitely more than on pace to do that right now. While I don't expect that production to continue throughout the year, I do think something has to be said about the connection that Tua and Tyreek have found over this, just over a year playing together. Hill, I think, playing without Tua, sitting at about 75 yards a game for the Dolphins, versus when Tua plays, he's at about 117. And, whether it's just the timing of those two players, being in the starting lineup together, I love the way that Hill's been able to play under Tua. And I think, the same can be said the other way around. I think having those downfield threats in Hill and Waddle has done a lot for Tua as a guy who doesn't have, the greatest arm in the world. I think a super strong performance. The numbers, I think, are a little bit inflated. Again, I think the disappointment here has to be on the Chargers' defensive side of the ball. In terms of a season-long outlook, I still like the Chargers more here. In a matchup-to-matchup game, but I like the X factor that Miami possesses.
Yeah, to me, I think Miami's run game is, I think, one of the only things that really concerns me, because I truly believe that you need it. But with Devin Arcane coming back here soon with injury, Raheem Mostert being a very solid back in his own right, I think, they don't have a ton to worry about in that department. But for the Chargers, for me, I really just think Brandon Staley, I was looking at it, as a whole, in the years he's been coach with the Chargers, they have been bottom 5 in the league in overall defense every year. And I just think you can't do that with such a talented roster and still keep your job, because I think there are so many other prospective coaches or young coaches you could take a chance on that would do better with this roster than he would. And not to mention the blunder in the playoffs last year. I really just think he has shown that he is incapable of being a primary play caller.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And, I like the addition of Kellen Moore for the Chargers, most definitely. I think the offense had more flavor than it has had in the past. Maybe some of that can be attributed to how well the rush game performed yesterday. I really love the potential of Justin Herbert in the offense. But that being said, that is that potential word. And I'm with you. I'm not really high on Brandon Staley as a coach. I think his calling card when he came into the league was how aggressive he was going for it on fourth down. And I think I think that was part of his character, right? And when you go away from those types of things, how can I be confident in a head coach that doesn't even know what he wants to do?
Yeah, no, I agree. And then as we kind of switch gears, we go on to another game. I think that, just like the last one, surprised a lot of people, was the Rams Seahawks. A lot of people had the Rams as one of the worst teams in the league. There was a lot of reports about Matt Stafford struggling to connect with his teammates. And among other things, I really would not have expected the game to have been a runaway like this, especially with how good Seattle was last year. But the Rams really put that O-line to work on the Seattle side, and Matt Stafford looked very comfortable as he came back from that arm injury. So, Wilson, what were your takeaways here?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm right there with you, Drake. A super surprising outcome in this one for me as well. I think that can be said about a lot of these week 1 matchups. I was really not as low on the Rams as many people. I think there was a lot of talk of the Rams potentially tanking for Caleb Williams. And to me, if you have Sean McVay, Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, that you're just never in a position to tank for a guy like Caleb Williams. That being said, I didn't expect them to blow out the Seahawks, mostly in part because I'm pretty high on the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks played a lot of, first and second year snaps last year, and looking at the roster as a whole, I really expected them to just get better. I really like Geno Smith and the role he played for them last year. And, when you've got Pete Carroll, the weapons each, the weapons each get a year older. The defense is getting a year older. I really thought the Seahawks were going to come out looking a lot better than they did. I want to give a lot of credit to Stafford. He looked really nice yesterday. Doesn't look as much aged as I kind of expected him to be. And truly the biggest surprise for me was the Rams and that rush game. Kyren Williams played really well for them yesterday, had 2 touchdowns, and I didn't really see that coming, but I want to give credit to McVay and the way they've kind of structured that offense. He brought in a lot of external people outside of the organization. I thought it did well for them yesterday.
Yeah, and I think what also, though, is, what has always impressed me by McVay is the sort of being able to succeed under any circumstance. I think it's really shown why he's one of, in my opinion, the better coaches in the league. Cam Akers averaged only 1.3 yards carry on 22 carries, but to use Kyren Williams and then feature him late in that game, as well as having a guy like Tutu Atwell be your leading receiver, I think is, without Cooper Kupp, how are you going to adapt? And he showed they really can. And like you said, Matt Stafford seamlessly came in. And again, I'm not sure if I'm writing off Seattle for this year as much as saying this might just be the week 1 kind of shock that a lot of teams seem to have this week. So I think what's more impressive to me was the Rams winning than it was unimpressive as the Seahawks only scoring 13 points at home.
Absolutely. To stay on the Seahawks, I'm with you. I really like the Seahawks as a year-long perspective here. I will say one thing that concerned me a little bit, and I'd like to chalk it up to just it being week 1, was the Geno Smith kind of passing chart. I was looking at it, and super conservative throws from Geno all night. Nothing really downfield. Basically just, throwing 5-10 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So not the Geno we saw last year. But again, maybe there's a little bit of rust factor there, just getting back into the swing of true NFL playing time. So yeah, I didn't really have anything major outside of that. I still like the Seahawks, a lot, like year long, but the Rams I think are going to be better than people thought going into the year.
I agree. And so then to turn over to our end of our first segment here, we're going to just kind of look at how the rookies did. And so we're going to start with Stroud. Obviously not looking for a ton here. It's just the first game, but what were kind of your first impressions with him?
Yeah, I thought Stroud looked decently comfortable in the pocket for the most part. I think, as with week one, it is for rookies. I think oftentimes rookies come out, come into the year playing very well. And once teams start to get a little bit more tape on them, they struggle a little bit more into the mid-year. And that's kind of what I expect to see from Stroud this year. Ohio State quarterbacks, a lot of people make a lot about whether or not they can succeed or not in the NFL. Stroud is a guy that I'm a little higher on. I think he has a decent arm. I think he's got good pocket presence. But yeah, I'm with you here. Obviously that the Ravens defense is pretty strong. Texans, I thought, held their own for a little bit in that game, and then Baltimore pulled away, as I think most people expected them to. So nothing major on my end from CJ.
Yeah, my takeaways were kind of the same because it was a lot of completions for him, but he didn't really do anything that I think jumped off the page. But he also, again, that Texans O-line is notoriously struggled. They have some really good players on it, like Laramie Tunzel, but as a whole, the unit's not great. So, he was sacked 5 times, which isn't what you want to see for your rookie, right? Him getting taking all those hits. But I think he looks solid. And again, considering the history, like you said, of Ohio State quarterbacks, I think this was a promising week 1 game. And I think, again, also, I just want to congratulate D'Amico Ryan on his start, because I don't think this showing at all was terrible by them, especially with some of the other good and really playoff caliber teams, I think, who struggled. I think this Texans team was played a lot better than I thought they would against the Ravens.
Absolutely.
And so then as we carry on over to Bryce Young, obviously, the NFC South is a lawless division right now. I mean, I really think I'm not sure what to make of it, but regardless of that, in a division that I consider very winnable, Young, I would say, probably had the most lackluster debut of any of the rookies. So what were your kind of takeaways with that?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I think for the Panthers, when I look at their overall roster, especially on the offensive side of the ball, might be the least talented roster in the league. And so I want to give, Bryce Young a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. In terms of just the long-term outlook of Young, I don't love the size. It's a hesitation I had about Kyler, and I feel a similar sentiment about Bryce Young. I think the intangibles, everything you read about, everything you hear about him in the locker room, he seems to have the right attitude and the right mentality going into the season, and for that I love. But I do think at the end of the day, you need a little bit of size and you need a little bit of talent. While I don't think he lacks anything in heart, I do have concerns about his ability to throw downfield, a little bit of just his ability to read the defense at that size. So again, a lackluster opening night for Bryce Young. I would agree with that.
See, but honestly, I would say away game as your first game, and I'd say he played better than Desmond Ridder, who did a whole lot of nothing. Desmond Ridder, on the other hand, has a ton of talent around him in Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Mac Hollins, Tyler Algier, and he looked about as boring as an NFL quarterback could be. So honestly, for Bryce Young, kind of very much similar to what I said about Stroud, where I don't think it was super impressive. But again, for a week 1 game, I think it could go a lot worse. So I think pretty much all of the rookies as a whole, I'd say there was promise in all of them. I don't think any of them had a truly hopeless debut.
I think that's fair to say. Did you want to touch on Richardson?
Yeah, I did, because he's the one who I think had the best opening day, not to mention playing. I think he also him and Stroud kind of were facing the steepest competition, and I think they played better, which I think is very interesting on both of their sides, because going into a game being an underdog, and again, for Richardson, a lot of people deemed him just a project, didn't think he'd start year 1. So to then start year 1, run one in on your own, to throw one, and with, again, a very lackluster receiver core, I think Richardson, again, as someone who went to the game, I did not expect him to play that good. I really was not even planning on scoring 10 points. So to see his command of the offense so early, I saw a lot of good things from him, similar to the other guys, where it's like, definitely there's some bad there. There's some raw potential. He had a few overthrows, but I think with all these guys, and him especially, I think there's a lot of promise among these young guys.
Absolutely. And with Richardson, out of the 3 rookie QBs we have right now, he's the one who I like the potential and the ceiling the most. I just think, his ability to run the ball just makes him super dynamic. And, I think, everyone said it. He's super raw talent. Not sure if he was going to start. And to see him start and play so well, they were in that game with the Jags for quite some time. And so I just love to see that fight and that hustle out of Richardson. I think the locker room has really come around him too. And I think that's super important for a rookie QB.
Yeah, I agree. Being voted a year 1 captain is always a big thing for an NFL guy. So incredible. I think that showed a lot about him. And with that, we will go into our next segment where we will talk about our season projections.
Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. We're opening our B block today, giving our season-long projections. So Drake and I are a little late here. Obviously, week 1 of the NFL season has already concluded. Personally, I made all of these projections before the season, so I will probably attach a small asterisk to some of them looking at week 1. But as we kind of talked about in the A block, don't want to take away too much from week 1, just given the lack of playing in that preseason. So we're going to start this segment with our awards pick. So Drake, let's just go straight off the top. Let's go to Coach of the Year. Who's your pick?
For Coach of the Year, I went for a kind of unorthodox one, similar to my NBA picks last year. When I'm doing these picks, just like you, I do them before the season, and I take pretty much all offseason to really think about them. And so what I kind of thought was, for me, I had the Mike McCarthy being Coach of the Year. I know that's a surprising one. A lot of people notoriously harped on him at Green Bay for not being a great coach and kind of letting his talent carry him. And while I partially agree, I also have to say it's his first time calling plays since he's come to Dallas. Before Kellen Moore did the responsibilities, obviously with him leaving, he took over the responsibility. And this new offense, obviously we haven't gotten to see a ton of it because that first game was a defensive slaughter. But I think the Cowboys, I think they have a very high ceiling this year, and I'm almost never high on the Cowboys, but I think if there's a year for them to do it, I think this could be the year with the addition of Brandon Cooks. I think Mike McCarthy has a lot of offensive weapons to work with, and I think they might do just enough for him to win the bid.
I like that pick. Definitely a surprise for me. And when I was making this pick, I was going between two guys. I was going between Pete Carroll and Mike McDaniels, and I ultimately landed on Mike McDaniels for a number of reasons here. Firstly, you make a lot about, the dynamic a quarterback has between their offensive coordinator / their head coach. And to me, the Tua Mike dynamic is just something that I really love to see. Just the sound bites that come out of their practices on game day. I just really like the trust that Mike McDaniels has seemed to put into Tua, and just I love the way that Tua's playing under him. So, given that Tua stays healthy and that offense continues to hum like they did yesterday, I really like the Miami Dolphins outlook for the season, and that's something I'll touch on a little bit more as we go through these picks.
No, I just kind of wanted to agree with you. I had Mike McDaniels in the running just because even though I'm not huge on Tua, I think their offense is always very interesting. It's very explosive, even when Tua's not in there. So that was someone I considered, but ultimately went with McCarthy.
Absolutely. I think with that, then we'll switch over to our MVP pick for this year.
Okay, so for me, I went, again, kind of unorthodox, but I think both of these will surprise you. I had two picks, and both of them are about as unorthodox as the other. One is definitely a real wild card, so I'll save that one. I had Justin Herbert, just because, again, I think adding Quentin Johnson to that wide receiver core, the talent around him is truly remarkable, as well as Kellen Moore. I really like him as a play caller. I know he moved on from the Cowboys, but I think what he does is interesting. And like you said, the flavor he adds, he loves using an extra lineman and doing a bunch of cool things that I think Justin Herbert will benefit from, as well as, again, getting Quentin Johnson. That's another 6'4", just massive target that he's going to throw to. So when you have Parham, Johnson, Allen, and Mike Williams all above 6'1" out there on the receiver core, I just think that's a dangerous combination. And then my other pick was Kirk Cousins, who I know a lot of people hate, but if Minnesota plays well this year, they added now Hawkinson last year, who he got into a rhythm with. They added Jordan Addison, who had a great rookie debut. And with Dalvin Cook leaving, they're going to have to throw more. So his numbers might be very inflated. And if they get a similar record to last year, I could see him getting it out of principle because, in week 1, having to almost throw for 400 yards in a loss, imagine what he's going to do in a win. So I just think both of those guys that I listed will have the stats and records good enough to win them the bid.
Wow, I did not see that coming from you. Not necessarily the Kirk Cousins as a dark horse, but Justin Herbert as your MVP pick. I think historically on the show, I've been a little higher on Herbert than you. And Herbert is actually the guy I had coming in number 2 on my mock ballot. I am going to stay pretty mainstream and vanilla here with my pick for MVP. I really just think it's going to be Mahomes again. While I do believe in the factors of MVP, voter fatigue, as well as, the Chiefs having a regression year, I just really think that Mahomes is going to be the best player again. I think the stats are going to be there. I think the team's going to win. And, unless a guy like Hurts comes out again with, the Eagles and they go 14-3 or something like that, I really just don't see another team upseeding Mahomes' ability to win the MVP. So a little boring there, but that's my pick.
Yeah, I just think seeing that week 1 reliance on Travis Kelce now with no other true number 1, Kelce hasn't missed a game in years, but it's only natural that he's going to age, and seeing how much that offense is built around it, it really just scared me because it kind of showed that, I saw Mahomes panic more in that week 1 game than I have in a while because he couldn't get into a rhythm with anyone. I think that was very interesting, and I think that's what's going to prevent him from ultimately being one of those top guys this year.
Thanks for giving me the escape hatch, on that. Yeah, no Kelsey, yeah, and not able to win the MVP. I think with that, we'll move over to Defensive Player of the Year.
So again, I think this one's probably my most conventional pick. Because I went edge rusher because it seems to be the only position that can win unless a corner just has an unbelievable season. And so I went Aiden Hutchinson. Watching him in that week 1 game against the Chiefs, a very good offensive line unit, really have his way against the defensive line in both the running game and the passing game. He's got all of the tools. I really think I put him on that sort of Myles Garrett level of when Myles Garrett came into the league, I knew he was going to be good. I've always kind of held Aiden Hutchinson in that same air, and that's why I have him winning it this year.
Very nice. Again, I'm going to be pretty mainstream here. I'm going to go with Micah Parsons for the Cowboys. I just really like the Cowboys' ability to defend the ball this year, really, and I think the Cowboys could have the number 1 defense in the NFL and it not be close, and I think that is all centered around Micah Parsons and his ability to create pressure. So I'm going to stick with Parsons. Again, kind of a mainstream pick.
On the Parsons pick, though, my only thing is with him playing edge, I do think this is his year. He has his best chance. The Cowboys said they are going to put him as a designated rusher a lot more this year. And as I said, you really almost have to be an edge rusher primarily to win the Defensive Player of the Year in the current NFL. So I really do think that's a good pick. I'm not going to say that was one of the ones I thought about, but I know he's the favorite right now, and I completely understand why, especially with that news coming out from the Cowboys.
Most definitely. Next up, we have Offensive Rookie of the Year.
So for this one, I stayed pretty close to home. I said Anthony Richardson. I just think the Colts are going to rely on him so much. His stats are going to be insane. So even if they suck, he threw the ball almost 40 times week 1, and he's a guy who was considered a project. I think that's going to be almost every week. I think his numbers won't even necessarily be that impressive as much as they are inflated, but I think that'll be enough to get him the bid.
Very nice. I went with Bijan Robinson. I just really think that, his ability to kind of give that Falcons offense a second dynamic is just super important to their ability to win. And I also like the Falcons as a sneaker pick to maybe compete to win that division. So really like Bijan in that spot. I think for our awards picks then, we'll end off with Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, so for here I had Jalen Carter. He had a really dominant showing against the Patriots. Obviously, he dropped due to some pre-draft controversy, but aside from that, it can't be argued that the dude isn't an amazing football player, and he showed that. I think it said he leads the NFL right now in pressures, and he's a rookie, and he didn't even play the entire game. So I just think that's an insane stat. And despite only having 1 sack, the dude's just a game wrecker. We saw it at Georgia. I have him winning defensive rookie of the year.
Most definitely. And you stole all of my stats there. I feel exactly aligned with you there. Jalen Carter was my pick for all the reasons that you laid out there. And I think the Eagles defense as a whole is going to be super strong again, especially on that front end. So really like Jalen Carter as the pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year. So with that awards picks being concluded, we're going to switch over to doing our final 4 picks for the year, that being our AFC title game, our NFC title game, as well as our Super Bowl picks and champion. So Drake, kick us off. Who do you have in the final 4 and who do you have winning?
Yeah, so for me, I think this really is a year where I think the NFC is very heavily favored. As the Chiefs don't have a really true weapon, the Dolphins are kind of unproven. Those are 2 teams I really liked, but and as well as the Bengals getting blown out week 1 and the lack of solution, and Joe Burrow is still just taking hits, that being a concern. I really wasn't sure. The Bills have a pretty similar roster to last year, so the AFC side was really hard for me because I don't think any team got significantly better to the point where I'm 100% all in on them. The teams I had written down as potential AFC members were Ravens, Bengals, Bills, Dolphins, or Chiefs. I ultimately think I'm going to go Ravens, Chiefs, just based off pedigree, but Bengals are interchangeable with either of those 2. I think those 3 teams to me are the top tier talent in the AFC. But again, it just comes down to coaching and play. But I think with Lamar getting an actual offensive coordinator who's going to try to air out the ball a little more, I think that favors them. And the Chiefs, again, I'm just going based off pedigree, having Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones now is playing again. I think they're favored. And the Bengals, that offense is just insane. And then on the NFC side of things, this one was pretty cut and dry for me. The only 3 teams I really had in contention for a Super Bowl this year were Niners, after that dominant week 1 showing. I think that really just reiterated the point that Brock Purdy might be a really sort of just a slight step up from Jimmy G in the best way possible. The Cowboys, and that's just because, again, out of principle, the talent on that roster is insane. The NFL wants them to be good so bad, and again, with McCarthy calling plays, he has won a Super Bowl. So I do think that honestly helps them, even though some might disagree with me there. And then I had the Lions as my last pick. Just because, again, all the things I said before, they're the hot team. Their last 2 wins were keeping someone out of the playoffs and beating the Super Bowl champion. I mean, that's a pretty impressive resume. Throw on top of that an amazing head coach, a quarterback who's already been to a Super Bowl before, tons of great veterans on the roster. I had Lions and Niners on the NFC side of things for my prediction.
Very nice. And then who did you have making it to the Super Bowl, and who did you have winning?
So for the Super Bowl, I had Lions or Niners, and then I had the Bengals actually, just because as I was thinking about it more, I just think this is the year they pretty much have to win if they want to win. With T. Higgins and them not even being anywhere on a contract, I just think their team is going to get a lot worse with this Joe Burrow contract. It's what you see, right? There's always usually a dip after they sign a guy, right? Very rarely does that not happen. So I think this is the year. If the Bengals are going to make it, they have to make it. So I kind of rode that for my Super Bowl prediction, even though I didn't even have them in my AFC thing. I had them on the bubble, but the more and more I thought about it, the more I was just like, I think they're going to have to do it. But I do ultimately have the Niners winning this year on the principle of I just think they are the best overall roster in the NFL.
Very nice. I think you did a great job of outlining, some of the true contenders around the NFL, and I'm with you. I think the NFC got a lot stronger this year, whereas a lot of teams in the AFC were pretty stagnant, and some of them might have even gotten worse. So when I was making my picks, super aligned with a lot of what you laid out there. In the AFC, I have the Chiefs and the Dolphins. I really, really consider the Bengals here. But again, I just, not even, I did this before that week 1 game. There's just something about the Bengals. To be competitive so many years in a row, I think you have to be truly, truly elite. And I really feel the same with you. I think the Bengals window's right now, and I just don't know if they'll be able to get it done this year. So in the AFC, I have the Chiefs and the Dolphins in the AFC title game. In the NFC, I had the 49ers and the Cowboys. And for all the things that you laid out, I think the Niners having Brock Purdy on that rookie deal, on a 7th round rookie deal, nonetheless, it's just incredible for the rest of that roster. They've got Pro Bowlers at every position. And for the Cowboys, like I mentioned earlier on in the pod, I just really love that defense this year. I think the defense alone can get them places, and if the offenses can even just stay afloat above water, if Dak can be just somewhere on a borderline top 10 quarterback, I think the Cowboys are going to be a contender to the end. In the Super Bowl, I have the Chiefs and the Niners. This is the pick I had last year. And, you talk about all the time how difficult it is for a team to go back to back to win the Super Bowl. Even just getting to the game is tough. And so kind of a risky pick in the Chiefs here. But on the Niners side of things, I just, again, I think that roster top to bottom, I like Kyle Shanahan as the head coach. And I think Brock Purdy has just looked, better and better with each game he's played, not just year over year, considering this is only his 2nd year. So Chiefs and Niners in the Super Bowl, and much to your dismay, I'm going to take the Chiefs to go back to back. Hasn't happened in 20 years, but if there's a guy that can do it, I'm going to trust in Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. So Chiefs go back to back is my prediction for the year.
Man, yeah, like I said, I think it's, again, the going back to back is hard enough, let alone when your receiver core is lackluster as theirs. I don't think they still have a solid enough secondary. And with again, just the struggle I saw in that week 1 game when a team really put some pressure on Mahomes to go off of, and you make him not comfortable. I just think that to me is what is going to do it. I think, again, if they trade for a guy like T. Higgins midseason, I think they're right back in it. But I think it's going to take something like that for me to think of them really as a Super Bowl caliber team this year, just because the NFL changes so fast. It's the same reason I don't even have the Bills in consideration. To me, you have to always be improving. You can't just stop. So many teams have seen that. You always have to be improving. Look at the Rams, right? They bought in for that 1 year, and then they kind of slowed down, and then they were abysmal. You just have to double down. You have to keep going, and I just don't think the Chiefs have done that. On the other hand, I think the Niners and Lions have done the exact opposite. Niners trading for C-Mac, as well as continuing to put support around Brock Purdy and now really buy into him, as well as just having one of the best defenses in football. And then kind of same thing with the Cowboys, doubling down, getting a guy like Brandon Cooks, team like the Lions getting Chancey Gardner-Johnson. Again, those teams are guys who went out and made a move. I just don't think the Chiefs did anything equivalent.
I think you make a great point about championship windows and how important it is for you to capitalize on the windows that you have. I think my only pushback for the Chiefs would be I loved how many rookies and second-year players they played last year. And for those players to get another year of NFL experience, I do expect that defense to be slightly better. When I think about the top-tier talent on the roster, Kelsey obviously missed week 1. I don't expect him to miss much more of the season. And while I do expect, expect the cliff to happen at some point, I think Kelsey's got at least one more good year in him. Jason Kelsey came back to play yet another year. I do think Travis can do it too. And then finally, the Chris Jones holdout situation, obviously not great, but for Chris Jones himself to come out and say that he is going to be playing by the latest at week 8, I think, that defense is going to be able to generate enough pressure on the quarterbacks, on opposing quarterbacks come the postseason, that I still like the Chiefs all around top tier talent. I think the bottom half of that roster got a little bit better. So, I could buy my words in a couple of weeks, but for now I'm going to stick with the Chiefs.
Yeah, no, and again, I think that's a warranted pick through and through, just because of pedigree. But like I said, in my eyes, you really just constantly have to be getting better to stay in contention. And the Chiefs usually are notoriously fantastic at that, always adding people, right? Be it the Juju Smith-Schuster acquisition, rebolstering that O-line a few years ago after guys like Eric Fisher left. They just consistently, Andy Reid is so good about that, just always trying to get better, right? Every week get a little better. So I just think I don't think they have this year. So barring a crazy move at the deadline, I still love the Niners and Lions, especially, I think are the two teams that I'm really going to rock with this year in terms of what I think have true endgame potential, because they've been there before. Obviously, Shanahan now has been to two Super Bowls, one as OC, one as a head coach. Brock Purdy has been to an NFC championship. Even if he got injured in it, he still was there, right? So those nerves aren't going to be nearly as bad. And the Lions have Jared Goff at the helm, who I think is really redefining his career as this really solid veteran player and presence on a Lions team with a young head coach in Dan Campbell, who has the players playing some of the best football of their lives. I just think those two teams have the combination of the hot hand, the pedigree, as well as the veteran experience to really take them to that next level of pedigree.
And it's hard not to love the Lions. Jared Goff, I think, is just over 40 passes away from breaking the most consecutive passes without an interception record. And that's not without him throwing the deep ball. He's still, throwing risky passes out there. So I do really like the Lions. I think with that'll wrap our B block. We'll be back in just a moment with our C block, where we're going to do some Twitter takes as well as recap our overall season projections. And Drake and I are going to be picking every game. So we'll see you in a minute. Hey, welcome back into the B sides of sports. Upon finishing our B block segment, I realized that we left out Offensive Player of the Year, and this I think is the one that Drake was most excited to talk about, so we'll have to throw that in right here. Drake, who's your pick for Offensive Player of the Year?
So this is, I think, probably my most conventional pick, as well as one that I'm the most comfortable in saying I think has probably the best odds of any of my picks of actually winning the award, and that is Christian McCaffrey for Offensive Player of the Year. I just think, as I said in the B block, I really doubled down on my love of the Niners, as well as Shanahan's awesome play calling. They have the best fullback in football in front of McCaffrey with a full offseason with the team now. I just think this is going to be his team through and through. I think the offense is slowly going to become one of those things where it's almost a relic of days past, where an offense utilizing a running back is going to be the number one team in the league. And with Shanahan's creativity, as well as, his father being a successful NFL head coach for many years, I think it is the perfect situation for Christian McCaffrey to just run over everybody and maybe have that elusive 2,000-yard scrimmage season.
I really like the C-Mac pick, especially with Brock Purdy as the quarterback. And not to take a dig at Brock Purdy, but, in an offense where the quarterback isn't really the star of that offense, I think you can give a lot of credit to the receiving weapons as well as the running backs. And for C-Mac to serve as a dual threat for that offense, I just think it's going to be an incredible season for him. My pick here, too, is pretty conventional. I really like Justin Jefferson in this spot. And for many of the things that you laid out for Kirk Cousins, I think if Kirk has a big year, it's going to be on the back of Justin Jefferson. I do think Jefferson's the best receiver in the league right now. Credit to Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, and Jamar Chase, but I just really like Justin Jefferson and the dimensions that he gives that Vikings offense. I think he's a weapon that Kirk has obviously never had in his career, and I think it's really unlocked Kirk as a passer. And given that the Vikings aren't going to have the best running game this year, I just really like the offensive load that Jefferson's going to be carrying.
So as we finish up our show today, something new we're doing this year is we are going to do our picks every week. Now, we won't necessarily be doing this illicitly in terms of doing it on the pod, but me and Wilson will personally make our own picks, and we will touch on it every week, as well as have our overall records. For week 1, outside of the Monday night game, which is yet to be finished, I went 9-5, and Wilson went 7-7. And starting from now on, those will just be at the bottom of the screen. They'll become more and more of a thing as the season goes on, but we just wanted to introduce it as something fun and a little more dynamic this year. And just because, some of our picks are where some of our best or dialogue has come before. So we just thought it would be fun to have something like that.
Yeah, tough opening for me. I think 500 on a money line is not great, but I think I'll have a better season than that. So we're excited to do that this season.
And it's like I said, week 1 is always the hardest week. Week 1's a whole lot of luck, right? Guessing what underdogs are going to win, guessing what favorites are going to lose. It really is one of the hardest weeks to predict. But I think that's why this is also just going to be a real fun challenge for the both of us as well.
Absolutely.
And so as we get into our C block, our segment for today is Twitter Takeover. If you're a fan, as you know, we've done a few of these before, but if this is your first time listening, me and Wilson just go around the world of Twitter, or X, I guess I should say, but that name does X Takeover
doesn't sound the
Twitter
same.
Takeover. So we're sticking with Twitter Takeover for the time being, but we just find a few tweets from around the league and the sporting world and kind of talk about them, have some fun with them, and usually just quick, lighthearted stuff. So Wilson, what was your first one to open up today?
My first one's to really highlight something that you kind of talked about earlier on today, but it's some stats relating to rookie Jalen Carter. So in that NFL debut against the Patriots, he had 1 sack, 7 quarterback pressures, and a 32% pass rush win rate. That's the most pressures by any DT week 1, most pressures by any rookie DT in a game in over 5 years. So just an incredible rookie performance from Jalen Carter. Really like seeing that, and really like him as the pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year.
No, I agree, and it's funny. So you went someone having a great week for a sort of stat pick. I went someone having a truly horrendous week. I did Deion Jackson, the Colts running back, obviously for the injured Jonathan Taylor. He went 13 carries for 14 yards and 2 fumbles on the day. Or if you want to go from scrimmage, 16 total touches for 31 yards, 2 fumbles, and 2 drops. So really just a tough day at the office. We really kind of showed our mindsets there, where you had a more optimistic outlook and more fun, and mine was just to show how abysmal the Colts run game was.
Yeah, no, that's funny. For my next one then, I kind of have a little bit of I don't even know if you would call this a hot take, but it was a take that I saw that I thought would be interesting to just consider for a moment. The tweet was just simply Baker Mayfield over Justin Fields. And at first I saw that and I was like, that's a huge overreaction to just one game, 1 week into the season. And the more I thought about it, I still like Fields much more, but I do think that Baker's still hanging around kind of in that bottom tier of, could he be a starting NFL quarterback? I really sold my Baker stock after, the ending with the Browns, and I thought he had moments for the Rams, but not really a great overall end to that season. So yeah, I think Fields obviously to me has to be the better player, but I thought that was an interesting hot take.
Yeah, see, I think what's so interesting to me is because I think as overall quarterback, I think there's an argument to be made for Baker being better, but for an overall football player, Fields is infinitely better, like you said, where it's like you're still higher on Fields. I'm higher on Fields as well, but what I think I've seen from Fields is a lack of development, while from Baker, on the other hand, we've seen a lot of growth, be it from personal growth, right? Obviously having a lot of off the field issues in college, really growing up as a person and a player, playing through an injury with the Browns, having an amazing rookie season, and giving the Browns his all, even though they really didn't give it to him. So I think that's an interesting take, and kind of interesting to maybe touch on as the year goes on.
Maybe we can revisit,
see how that take matures. Yeah, no, I think that'd be interesting. It's funny, I actually went for a Bears take too, because I thought they had probably the most embarrassing week 1 loss, because of how much their fans and players and everything, everyone was talking so high on
go
them.
to the Super Bowl in some people's
eyes. And I completely
I
disagreed.
agree.
Partially because of one player in particular, Chase Claypool. Trading a second-round pick for him was very audacious, and if you watch the game, he did not play well, and there's a report that the Bears weren't happy with Claypool's overall effort this offseason, and they feel like that he isn't very self-motivated. The exact quote is, few people inside the building would say that he is somebody who is self-motivated. And just kind of, again, he had 2 drops that game, wasn't really run blocking, just kind of looked like he was out there going through the motions. So I think that'll be something to keep an eye on, as well as to see how this Bears team that so many people were so high on adjusts with the year.
Yeah, most definitely. Claypool was definitely the disappointing piece that was added to the Bears roster for me, as well as the defense. The defense just really didn't play well. A lot was made about the veterans they picked up and just kind of overhauling that roster. Really didn't turn out in week 1. We'll see if it's week 1, just, roster coming together, or if it's really an indictment on the season. My final tweet then here is actually a retweet of something that was old, but someone was kind of quote tweeting it to kind of poke fun at it, seeing if it was relevant or not today. And this is actually from 2019. It's a sports magazine, and the tweet is, Mahomes, Jackson, Danny Dimes is a new era in the NFL. And I just thought that was funny because, sitting here 4 years later, obviously Mahomes, one of, if not the best quarterback in the league. Lamar Jackson's a guy that a lot of people see a lot of, think he could have resurgence here. And then Danny Dimes, he had the nickname back then. A lot of people still call him that now. And, to me, I kind of alluded to it early on in the pod, but I don't know if I'm really that high on Danny Dimes, just at the price that the Giants are having to pay him. I don't know if he's really worth that much money. And so just thought it was an interesting conversation. We kind of talked about it earlier, but, I think if you're going to pay him that much money, he's got to be a top, at least 16 quarterback in the league. And to me, he's hovering more towards that bottom end.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, but to me, I just think it's the unfortunate nature of the NFL right now is if you want a quarterback, you have to pay for one. I did my senior paper in high school, my senior AP English paper on quarterback contracts and how insane the whole stigma is around them. And I think Daniel Jones is just kind of an example of that, where a team needed a quarterback and they'd rather have a guy they'd had for a few years and kind of know what he is and what he isn't than that sort of fear of the unknown. And I think that's I think they're okay with that. I think that's what they have settled
I think
for.
that's a good point. Kind of the economics of football, if you would, right? Like the quarterback position is just such a premium position right now that if you want anyone that's even competent at playing the position, you have to pay top dollar. Otherwise, you can only have a rookie quarterback for so long. I think that's why your points about like the Burrow contract kicking in and, what are the Niners going to do when Purdy is going to be more than, a bottom, one of the least paid players on that roster. It's a super interesting dynamic and it makes championship windows a super interesting conversation.
No, I agree. And then for my last tweet for the day, I just had the clip of Geno yelling, "Oh my God," as Aaron Donald was running down. And I think that really just sums up week 1 of the NFL season. An unblocked Aaron Donald sacking one of the best quarterbacks in the league last year on a free block after a stun is really just summed up how this first week of football went. Really just kind of a beautiful mess, if I had to describe it in a few words.
But that's what it is. It's beautiful, right? It's so fun to watch, and That's what we're here to do, right? Cover the stories that we don't see coming and the ones that we predict and the ones that we miss.
No, I really could not agree more.
I think with that, then that'll close out this opener to our season 3 of the B-Sides with Sports. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for tuning in. Drake and I really appreciate the support. We're super excited to launch a lot of things this season. So yeah, we're going to try to be pushing out content on a weekly basis. So catch us on the YouTube channel, hop over to Spotify if you're already on the podcast platform. And yeah, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.